Welcome back. Today we'll be looking at 6 underrated players within FPL, all of whom could really help strengthen your squad. Not only do we have some facilitators, but we also have some premiums that are being significantly underlooked in my opinion. As you've seen already, we've had a whole host of content so far this preseason, and that will be continuing, and it'll be getting even more in-depth as we get closer to the deadline. I've got a lot of good video ideas stored up, so do consider subscribing. And without anything else needing to be said, let's get into the video. We'll start with Dominic Szoboszlai, and the image you see there is one of him during his celebration against Real Betis last night after scoring the only goal in the game. Now, we'll start with the system and how essentially that, in tandem with just his skill set, potentially qualifies him to be a very, very good asset this year. So, slot system is very different to Klopp's, whereby it's not so much the wingers penetrating the half spaces and getting on the end of things, but rather it's the 8s and the 10s arriving in those central zones, with the wingers staying wide and offering more combinations in wider areas and also creative threat. Szoboszlai, on the other hand, in this system, could be the most advanced midfield, and that's very important, the word could, because if he's at the same level as Elliot Jones on the left, well, then we're not particularly interested because the output will be far too spread for us to justify spending 6.5 on Szoboszlai. However, if it's not, and he has dominion over that space, well, with his level of ball striking and the fact that he has tendencies to carry far more than deliver penetrative passes into the 9, well, I think that could be very good from him for an FPL standpoint. How he interacts with the 9 will be quite important. Obviously, Nunes is a runner, right? He loves making runs in behind, to the left and right of centre-backs and in those channels. And if Szoboszlai is not really supplying him because he would like to almost carry himself and he'd look for quicker combinations, like the one against Real Betis with Salah last night, then how effective is that combination going to be? Does he go to like a Shota or a Gakpo at 9? And these are all things that we'd have to see. But for now, assuming that he plays that position, he should at least deliver a level of output which is very promising for owners. The other thing is, he's got a really good engine on him. This guy can really run for a long period of time. And especially with Premier League football moving to such a transition-based game, players get tired quicker, which is very natural given how intense the games are. And given he's in such a good state of health, he can stay on the pitch, right? Because they'll need their best pressers and their biggest engines on the pitch. And then we move on to the fact that could he be Salah's cover? Well, if Salah is to play significantly wider, which I spoke about in his own video, which you can check out on the channel, and there were another few things there which I didn't really like about Salah going into the season. Well, for 6 million less, he's a brilliant way to cover the Liverpool attack. And if so, I think this guy has to be one of the first names on your team sheet because not only could he provide such a brilliant amount of points, but furthermore, at 6.5 million, he facilitates other premiums, like the ones we have in this video, very, very nicely. And at a price point where there's so much competition, if you can get it right early, you gain value in the player, you don't have to use a transfer, and you're already points up, well, that's great. So I'd definitely keep an eye on Szoboszlai. Now, the second player we have here is arguably my most favorite one out of all of these. And not only just these guys, but he's probably the one player that I haven't had in a draft yet that I just wish I could have. I'm finding it very difficult to fit him in with my current squad structure and how I'm looking to approach this year. But nonetheless, a brilliant, brilliant asset in my opinion, and one who's going to do very well for owners. We'll start with something that's become a bigger variable in the last few years, especially last year with the surge in the success of the analytics crew, right? And good on them, right? They found a new way to play the game and they've done remarkably well. And we should learn from them. And one of the things is expected minutes. That's something they've really honed in on. And it's been very beneficial for them. Havertz at 9 will have brilliant expected minutes because even if he is a wish for Jesus or Nketiah to operate those 9 zones, well, then he could very well move him to left 8 again or have him as a second striker because he is such a physical presence, which Arteta finds really important, especially not only in the opposition's box from corners, but also their own box to defend set pieces. He's got a very good work rate. Don't let the fact that he has a lethargic style of running fool you. He works hard. He's a good presser. He's very intelligent. And in terms of all the off-the-ball qualities, he fits a lot of them for the Arteta mold. So I think expected minutes-wise, especially if he's playing at 9, he's going to be great, okay? Then, within that 9 zone, he dominates that zone because he is 6'4", he's tall, and he's quick, and he's strong. And these are the type of things, especially within the modern game, where it's becoming a lot more physical within the Premier League. And there's less, let's say, tiki-taka and cute, intricate passes. But you need to be devastating on transition and have real athletes in your team, especially when Arsenal are going long term. This is hugely important. So again, it helps with expected minutes, but also the fact that he can occupy these zones and be so competent against centre-backs and deal with them physically means that he can get shots away. And it's definitely good for his goal and assist threat. His output at 9 not only benefits him, but it also weakens the appeal of Saka, I think. I think Saka therefore turns into a slightly more creative force with those left in-swinging crosses for Havertz. And the fact that Saka starts so wide anyway, compared to Havertz already being in the central zones, and given he's 2 million more, I wonder if it's going to become slightly difficult to justify having Saka over Havertz. Thus, with that in mind, and Havertz's performance towards the end of last season, where we definitely saw a surge in finishing, I wonder if he could be Arsenal's real focal point this year and the one to generate a lot of output, whereas Saka, again, becomes more of a creative supporting force. Sure, I'm sure he'll score goals, but I wonder if Havertz is going to be a real central figure in that, and essentially, a little bit like the Spurs system, they're going to try to set it up a bit more for the 9 than maybe other teams do. And then the fixtures, right? What I mean by stylistic suitability is that, let's take Odegaard, who's someone I discussed. I don't think the fixture against Villa or Spurs particularly suits him, like long distance transitions. Whereas Havertz is an athlete, a better athlete than Odegaard. At least he's stronger and quicker, and he can get across the pitch at a much faster rate. Thus, I think he'll be more comfortable in these more physical type of games, and his output shouldn't suffer as a result. If anything, he'll thrive given the specimen that he is. So I'm really bullish on Kai Havertz. I expect Arsenal to do very well again. They've recruited well so far, and yeah, as things seem, at 8 million, I think he could be a steal. Now, this is probably the one that I'm most on the fence about within this video. I certainly see the positives, but there are some negatives attached to him as well. So just keep that in mind and take everything with a pinch of salt. There are things I like, however, like I mentioned. One, the fact that he's 2.5 million cheaper than Watkins. And given Diaby's left, you assume that not only does he take the attacking responsibility of Diaby to an extent, but also his expected minutes, they must improve, right? Because Villa have only really him to play off the right. And also, now that they're going to be challenging for top 4 again, and the league will be harder this year, you need your more superstar quality to stay on the pitch just for them to be able to compete. Thus, I think with the improvement in expected minutes, he becomes a significantly better option and an option just in general compared to last year. The issue with him, similar to Watkins, is those first 2 fixtures. West Ham away, you just don't really know what you're going to get. Like, at times they looked decent last year, but at times they were so poor defensively. The space, especially between like the 6 and the 8, was just too much, and people playing out of position, for example, like Paqueta playing too wide, and things like that really not helping their case. Obviously, they've got a new manager, and we don't really know how they're going to perform from a structural point, and also a performance level, right? So those are the 2 things to keep in mind. And the other thing is that after that, you have Arsenal. So does it make sense to go for someone like a Szoboszlai at the same price for the better fixtures in the first 2? Well, yes, maybe. But Villa are a very good side. He is a very good player, and his expected minutes have improved. And with that in mind, I think it's very subjective. How do you see Villa performing? But if you see Villa beating West Ham and scoring a couple goals, then it's only really one fixture against Arsenal. And plus, they're at home, so they can score. And thus, I would really then consider Leon Bailey, because the fixtures from Game Week 3 get very nice. And if you can get in early on him, similar to Szoboszlai, you'll be miles ahead in the pack in the 3 variables cluster. Now, here's one I really like, and I hadn't given him too much thought because of Morgan Gibbs-White, but recently I've seen myself starting to gravitate towards him because he's an excellent facilitator. At 5.5, at 1 million less than MGW and all of the other 6.5s we discussed earlier, this guy provides you the ability to maybe go from like a Eze to a Havertz. Now, I really don't recommend selling Eze, but in theory, from a 7 to an 8, from maybe an Mbeumo to a Kai Havertz, maybe from a Gordon to a Bruno, as an example, who potentially is going a little bit under the radar, and we can discuss at a later date. But firstly, both Bournemouth press very intensely and quite high, and thus on transition, they're certainly susceptible to runners being exploited by them. Anthony Elanga is that, and he's very good at that. Not only can he carry, but he's quite technically sound in those small spaces when he needs to be, even to manipulate to get a shot off. So I'm quite happy to have him for his goal threat. MGW is brilliant in so many facets, one being carrying. But the fact he has to carry such long distances, for anyone who's even played a bit of football will know that by the time you've carried such a long distance, it's harder then to get your shot off because you're more tired, the body's more fatigued, you'll be at a slightly weirder off angle. Whereas Elanga, being slightly higher up the pitch, I imagine, especially given he's coming from a wide area, so the carriers are a slightly different style, right? Usually when you're able to carry in those spaces, there's not as many men to compete with. Well, it's just easier for him to finish, and thus I think at 1 million cheaper, is it worth it? I know he doesn't have penalties, nor the same expected minutes. Improved expected minutes, not the same expected minutes as MGW, but there's definitely an opening here. And Southampton, from what I've read, and I haven't read too much, but again, they're a little bit open, And someone like Gordon and Elanga for, having them as a combination in your team for game week 1 and 2 to certainly profit off of that. So yeah, he's definitely someone I'll consider because he had a very good season last year, I thought. And I think he's going to get a lot more starts this year and just secure minutes on the pitch, given the fact that he's more established. Even though Forest have strengthened, their front four of Woods, MGW, Cho, and Elanga looks pretty good. Now, this is one you may be surprised to see. And initially, when I was creating this video, I was going for players who are in the lower price bracket. But then I saw his ownership in the low 30s, and I was like, I still don't agree with that. And I think it should be higher. That game week 2 fixture is so tempting. And not only that, sure, it's Chelsea away in game week 1, but Enzo's spoken about how Chelsea could very well concede goals simply because they're trying to play out from the back in such an aggressive manner, right? Consistently. And he did that in Leicester. And I know at times the crowd got a little bit frustrated or on edge, and sometimes it backfired, right? And then you're doing that against Manchester City, one of the sides who are the best in the world in terms of their intelligence on the pitch, their structure, their positioning, and therefore one of the best to exploit a build-up structure, which maybe isn't fine-tuned, that takes so many risks. For example, the Foden goal away at Brighton towards the end of last season, that's what I think of. I think of players who are very intelligent, who can press well and profit from these type of mistakes. Now, the build-up's not of the same style, but the philosophies aren't too different, and thus, given where Haaland will be stationed, I think he could certainly profit. And that is just one of many variables. The fixtures after that, I think, are pretty good as well. There's no real reason that City should start poorly. Everything seems to be going pretty well for them, especially if they recruit maybe one more central player that will give Foden and De Bruyne a bit more of a nudge to perform to an even higher level. Thus, I'm very confident they start strong. He has a ceiling and especially a floor that no one else has. He can have the worst game in the world, but with penalties and the fact that he's such a box presence, a million other things, such as his ball striking, well, there's always a goal in the game for him. And I thought he didn't have a great season last year. I thought that Pep system didn't really help him out in terms of the amount he was avoided. I thought Foden, especially in those 10s, could have been a bit more of a passer where he was a bit more of a carrier and a shooter. But with De Bruyne re-entering the frame, especially in those first 4 where the schedule's a bit slower and he's well rested, and Foden's obviously had a much longer stay at the Euros, I think De Bruyne could definitely get some good minutes in those games, and that's very, very helpful for Haaland. Now he has a real pure and arguably the best passer in the world behind him. So that's that. And if you don't go for him, well, who do you go for? Do you go for Ollie Watkins? Sure, but I doubt he'll be able to match him again. I think he did tremendously last year. Maybe got a little bit lucky with his assist over performance in terms of FPL, but I doubt he'll be able to go punch for punch with him this time. And then getting him back in will be a real headache. Not only will you be transfers behind and points behind, then also people are going to be forward planning, and it's very difficult to restructure. Imagine all your money's locked up, let's say in Salah. Well, then, okay, you've got to sell Salah plus a forward, and that's still minus 2.5. So you've got to downgrade whoever the midfield asset will be significantly. And I just think it really requires 3 transfers, and that's going to be hard at the start of the season. We'll really want him game week 2. Thus, for me, I'd definitely consider if you're on a no Haaland draft. Now, the last player we've got is dissimilar to Haaland in the sense that he's a premium who's just lowly owned, full stop. Now, this is someone I would go for if you're, like me, looking at a real aggressive upside strategy in the first few weeks and potentially looking to hop on and off premiums. So I'll explain my strategy with Salah and then why I like him. Essentially, I'm looking to target the Leicester fixture in game week 1, a newly promoted side. He looks potentially like he's going to play at 9 in a system that's designed to create chances for the 9 disproportionately to others within the league. And that too, Leicester have a new manager, right? So with all those things in mind, it's a pretty safe fixture to have for game week 1. In game week 2, I actually moved to De Bruyne for Ipswich at home, and then I have the Haaland and De Bruyne double up with Haaland captain. Now, some people won't even own Haaland, a decent amount from what it looks like. And with that in mind, if I have Haaland captain and De Bruyne, that could be a huge, huge swing over at least maybe let's say 40% of the really active, engaged field. So that's what I'm thinking for game week 2. And from there, we can move to maybe Cole Palmer. He has a great fixture on after that. And if I get stuck with De Bruyne or Son, it's not the end of the world because they're premium assets who can perform really well. So for me, I'm looking at a 1-2 week punt with Son at the start. He's got a home fixture in game week 2, which I like, and then take things from there. I'm not really looking too far forward into the future. I simply see upside in the short term, and I might just jump on it. That's about it. That concludes the video for today. Thank you very much. If you liked it, please do subscribe to the channel and drop a like under the video. I will be back on Monday for another video. And as I mentioned, as preseason starts especially, more and more content and more in-depth content will be coming. I shall see you very soon. Goodbye.